Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back. We're doing the essay on self-reliance by Emerson. Just before we start with today's lecture, let me quickly go back over what we did in the last lecture. Self-reliance as a subject is rather difficult to speak on. But what R.W. Emerson has done is that he's given us various examples by which he's trying to explain the importance of relying on the individual, on our own innate abilities and capacities. What we studied in the last lecture was how Emerson tries to prevent us from relying on the knowledge of those who are dead and no more. And he gives the example of a firmament of poets and philosophers, and he says we have these hundreds of poets and philosophers who died hundreds, some thousands of years ago, and we're still following their examples, we're still following their teachings. Because we believe in them. And what Emerson is trying to emphasize in this essay is that we need to do away with that dependence and ensure that we rely on our own efforts. He says that a lot of times we think of an idea and then we discard it because it is our idea. And when we hear the same thing being uttered by another person, we say, oh, what a wonderful idea. So Emerson is trying to dissuade us from accepting other people's viewpoints, other people's ideas, particularly those of philosophers, wise men, and poets who are no more. And he says we must learn to depend solely on ourselves. One of the examples that he gives in explaining how important self-reliance is from the field of agriculture. And he says that when we plant corn, we get corn. We do not get wheat when we plant corn. So whatever we get is going to be dependent on what we sow, how we nourish it, how we till the soil, how we water our crops. And it does not depend on what someone from the outside comes and brings to us. What we get depends on what we do. What we get depends on the effort we put into doing a task, into completing a task. And he gives us various examples. One example that he gives us is that of young boys. And he says that we discard what young boys tell us because we say, oh, they're only young. But we must give importance to what people around us are saying. And if the people around us happen to be young boys, we must give it due importance. And the example that he gives is from the world of theater. He says that boys' ideas are as important to us as the pit is to the playhouse, because those who are in the pit are right in front of the stage, so they can best criticize what is going on the stage, not people who are sitting far away in the galleries. So young boys who are in our community, who are either in our household or in our immediate vicinity, they are our best critics. So we have to learn to accept their ideas and not discard them just because they are young. It's they who will give us good ideas, not the philosophers and wise men who died hundreds of years ago. So he says that if a boy appears tongue-tied or reserved to us, we should not discard his ideas as being unimportant, because if you send the same boy to another room where you have other boys sitting, that same person who could not speak in your presence will bloom in the other room and will come up with ideas which you'll be astounded to hear. So we have to give importance to these young men and their ideas. And then another example that he gave, and which I emphasized in the last lecture, was that he says you must love those who are in your household, with whom you have direct contact, and those who are in your immediate community, and not about those who live thousands of miles away. The example that he gives is that of people in Barbados. So he says that we cannot think about people in Barbados unless we are sure about our own community, our own household. We need to put our own affairs in order before we look outside our community. So he says that to love afar is to spite at home. If you show love and affection for those who are sitting on the other side of the world, that means that you do dislike people who are in your own vicinity. And the example that I gave you to add to this was that young men and women are more aware of friends and friends of friends of friends sitting in the US and Canada and other parts of the world, but they are not aware of who is sitting on the same sofa in the same room, because social media and cellular phones and the internet have brought you close to people living in a different region, but they have also taken you away from people in your immediate vicinity, so that you are texting someone who may be in another city, in another country, but you don't know how the person sitting next to you in class or at home is suffering. So what Emerson is trying to say is that we need to put our own house in order first before we move on to people outside our own community. Okay, so with that I bring you to the PowerPoints for today, and we'll discuss different ideas as we go along. The doctrine of hatred, Emerson says, must be preached as the counteraction of the doctrine of love when that pules and whines. I shun father and mother and wife and brother when my genius calls me. Now these are very hard words, but I want you to listen to them carefully, and then I'll come back and explain them. I would write on the lintels of the doorpost, whim, I hope it is somewhat better than whim at last, but we cannot spend the day in explanation. Expect me not to show cause why I seek or why I exclude company. So Emerson shifts his focus a little, and he says that when my genius commands me, when I get the urge to write or to create, then all relationships come to an end. Then my creative genius is what guides me, and then I have to write. So when I was reading through this, I told you that these are hard words that Emerson uses when he says that I ignore my father, my mother, my wife, and my brother when my genius calls out to me. But that's what creative artists are like. That's what men and women of letters are like. when the creative instinct takes over them, then they do not care where they are, they do not care for the company they are in, but they will create regardless of everything. So he says that when that creative genius comes over me, then I forget about all relationships, and then if I cannot find pen and paper, then I would write on the lintels of the doorpost. That's just a reference to Emerson's creative genius and the force of that creative genius. So, and he says that I don't want to give any explanations because I don't think I owe anyone any explanations. When I want to write, when I want to create, then I just go ahead and create, and no one can stop me, no one can prevent me from writing. Then again, do not tell me, as a good man did today, of my obligation to put all poor men in good situations. You know, this is something that we ourselves have to live through in our routine lives. People will come and say, oh, you must help so-and-so, you know, he's so poor, or she's in such a bad state, you know, her husband beats her, and her children do not have enough to eat, so you must help out because you have a lot of money. Emerson's question to these people is, are they my poor? I tell thee, thou foolish philanthropist, and these are Emerson's words, not mine, that I grudge the dollar, the dime, the cent I give to such men as do not belong to me and to whom I do not belong. There is a class of persons to whom by all spiritual affinity I am bought and sold. For them I will go to prison if need be. But your miscellaneous popular charities, the education at college of fools, the building of meeting houses to the vain end to which many now stand, alms to sots and the thousandfold relief societies, though I confess with shame I sometimes succumb and give the dollar, it is a wicked dollar which by and by I shall have the manhood to withhold. Now, there's a couple of very interesting examples that he's giving here. The question that he throws in first is, are they my poor? And then he sort of qualifies it. He starts off by saying that I grudge the dollar, the dime, the cent I give to people who do not belong to me. So he actually practices the old saying that charity begins at home. When he gives charity, he gives to people who are close to him. He doesn't give to what he calls miscellaneous relief societies. He doesn't give to popular charities. He gives to people he knows. There are people, he says, I would go to prison for. I would accept that responsibility. I would give my life savings to those people. But I will not give a single penny to charities just because everybody else is doing it. And then he qualifies this statement and he says that now and then I do succumb and I give $1 or I give $5 or $10. But he says there will come a time when I'll be strong enough to withstand all these miscellaneous charities. Let me give you an example. We have a lot of examples here in our society, in our community. People come to us and they collect donations. You know, these people who come for chanda, they'll say, we're building a masjid, so we need chanda. They'll say there are these orphan girls and we're arranging for their shadis, for their weddings. and so you must give chanda. And what they'll say is, you know, your next door neighbor gave so much, or you know, the lady down the street gave 10,000 rupees. So this is what Emerson means when he talks about popular charities. And such people, you do not know whether they are actually working for these charities or not. You don't know how much of the money is going into their own pocket and how much of it is going to this particular project that they're talking about. You don't know if any of the money is going to the project. So what Emerson is trying to say is that he does not believe in such charities. He doesn't believe in giving money or giving help to people whom he doesn't know personally. He says, people I know personally, I will give my life for them. I'll go to prison for them. But I will not give money just because it is fashionable to give money to some people or some organizations. So he is very, very strong in reinforcing this concept of not giving money to popular charities or to what he calls the thousandfold relief societies. He believes in helping those of whom he's sure that they need it and whom he knows personally, not just any old charity. Virtues are, in the popular estimate, rather the exception than the rule. There is the man and his virtues. Men do what is called a good action as some piece of courage or charity, much as they would pay a fine in expiation of daily non-appearance on parade. Their works are done as an apology or extenuation of their living in the world, as invalids and the insane pay a high board. Their virtues are penances. I do not wish to expiate but to live. So Emerson changes his direction a little, and he comes on to the issue of virtue, and he says that generally people believe that virtue and virtuous men and women are the exception rather than the rule. And then he talks about good actions, and he says there are people who do good actions and who say that, you know, this is my good deed for today. But he says they do it under duress. They do it at gunpoint. They do it because they think they must do it. They don't do it because they feel that, you know, it's a good thing to do. They do it as an order, as a command. And that's something that Emerson doesn't believe in. He says that I will not do a good deed because it is demanded of me at gunpoint. If I do a good deed, it will be because I believe in it, not because someone tells me that I must do it. So I will not give charity because someone says, oh, Emerson, you must give to this charity. I will give it because I believe in it, because I know the people concerned, and because I think that they deserve it. Otherwise, I will not give it. Because I do not believe in doing good because you must do it. I believe in doing good because you believe in it, not because so-and-so says you must do it. So he says people do good deeds like they're paying a fine, like they are apologizing for something, like they've committed a sin and they must undo that sin. So he says, I don't want to expiate. I don't want to spend my whole life begging forgiveness. I want to live. and I want to live my own life. I don't want to live somebody else's life. I don't want to live my life because somebody else wants me to live it in a particular way. I will do what I want to. I will help the people I believe in, and not just any odd human being. Because my life is for itself and not for a spectacle. I don't wish to show off. That's what Emerson believes. I much prefer that it should be of a lower strain, so it be genuine and equal, than that it should be glittering and unsteady. I wish it to be sound and sweet, and not to need diet and bleeding. Oh God. Now he's bringing in a different example here. He says that I want to live my life for itself, and I don't want to show off. I do not want a lot of limelight. I don't want people to say that Ralph Waldo Emerson is a wonderful person. He is a philanthropist. He gives so much money to charities. I don't want my name to be taken in such things. I wish my life to be sound and sweet. That is, I wish to lead a healthy life and not to need diet and bleeding, which is what you need to do if you become overweight. So he says, I want to live my life the way I like it, and not because somebody tells me that you must live your life in such a way. I ask primary evidence that you are a man, and refuse this appeal from the man to his actions. Okay? I know that for myself it makes no difference whether I do or forbear those actions which are reckoned excellent. I cannot consent to pay for a privilege where I have intrinsic right. Few and mean as my gifts may be, I actually am, and do not need for my assurance or the assurance of my fellows any secondary testimony. So, the best thing about Emerson is that he comes in with so many different examples. So he says that it doesn't make any difference to me whether somebody gives me something or not. But I have definite ideas about what I want to do, and I will do it, and I will not come under pressure. I am not a wonderful person, but I know that I am a human being. I have certain rights, and I aim to exercise those rights, and I do not need to have any outsider telling me that I live. I am, I live, and that's it. I don't want anyone's assurances on this. So he's satisfied with what he likes, and he doesn't want anyone's opinion. He's not concerned how people think of him. As he says, what I must do is all that concerns me, not what the people think. So he doesn't care about public opinion. This rule, equally arduous in actual and in intellectual life, may serve for the whole distinction between greatness and meanness. So, he brings in this comparison, and he says that great people are not concerned with public opinion. Mean people, low people, are always concerned with public opinion. They always want people to think well of them. But he doesn't care what the public thinks of him. It is the harder because you will always find those who think they know what is your duty better than you know it. And this is something that's true even of our own situation. There are always people who will tell you, this is what you must do, don't do this, do this. So they think that they know what you should do better than you do. Emerson doesn't believe in that. He says, I know what I have to do, and I'll go and do it. I will not care about what people think of me. I'm not running a popularity poll. And so I don't care what people think about me. I care what I think about myself. It is easy in the world to live after the world's opinion. It is easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. For nonconformity, the world whips you with its displeasure. But we'll come to that later. So he says, there are a couple of things he says here. It's easy to live in the world according to what the world wants you to. It's easy to live away from the world according to your own whims and fancies. But it's very difficult to live in the world the way you want to. So according to him, greatness lies in the individual who lives in the world according to his own ideas, not bowing down to public opinion. Nonconformity is what everything boils down to. You conform and the world is happy with you. If you do not conform to the world's opinions or to public opinion, then you are looked at as if you are a strange creature, an alien creature from another planet. So for nonconformity, the world whips you with its displeasure. The displeasure of the public is a very difficult weapon to avoid. That's something that the public uses, showing you its displeasure by various ways and means. And therefore a man must know how to estimate a sour face. The bystanders look askance on him in the public street or in the friend's parlor. If this aversion had its origin in contempt and resistance like his own, he might well go home with a sad countenance. But the sour faces of the multitude, like their sweet faces, have no deep cause, but are put on and off as the wind blows and a newspaper directs. Okay. So what Emerson is trying to say here is, don't go by public opinion. Because public opinion can be altered. Public opinion is altered at a whim. One person says one thing, 10 other people repeat it without corroborating it, and very soon an entire community thinks that way. It's the herd mentality. It's like sheep. One sheep is led down one path, all the others, the entire herd, the entire flock will follow without thinking of the consequences. So he says that if the public doesn't think well of you, don't get upset, because public opinion can be swayed very easily. If you think that the public is displeased with you, don't be upset, because their sweet faces and their sad faces can change like this. They do not have any deep cause, and they are put on and off as the wind blows and a newspaper directs. So public opinion. And we who are living in a world that is dominated by the media know very well how strongly this thing works. Newspaper, the media directs your attention to one fact, and that fact overpowers your imagination, your mind, to the exclusion of everything else. So he says, don't go by public opinion, because this is something that can be altered very easily and very quickly. Yet is the discontent of the multitude more formidable than that of the Senate and the college. So having said all that, he says public opinion is still more powerful than what the government says or what your contemporaries say. It is easy enough for a firm man who knows the world to brook the rage of the cultivated classes. Their rage is decorous and prudent, for they are timid as being very vulnerable themselves. But when to their feminine rage the indignation of the people is added, when the ignorant and the poor are aroused, when the unintelligent brute force that lies at the bottom of society is made to growl and mew, it needs the habit of magnanimity and religion to treat it godlike as a trifle of no concernment. So what he's trying to say is that intelligent people or educated people are easy to mold, but when you arouse the displeasure of the general public, the uneducated masses, the illiterate masses, then he says that you need a very big heart, you need to have a very strong heart to treat it as being of no concern. It's very easy to be swayed by the public opinion, and he's not talking about the opinion of the cultivated or the refined classes. He's talking about the opinion of the general public, the man in the street, the masses. The other terror that scares us from self-trust is our consistency, a reverence for our past act or word, because the eyes of others have no other data for computing our orbit than our past acts, and we are loath to disappoint them. But why should you keep your head over your shoulder? Now, here's a point that he makes, but let me go through this next slide also, and then I'll come back and explain it. Why drag about this corpse of your memory lest you contradict somewhat you have stated in this or that public place? Suppose you should contradict yourself. What then? It seems to be a rule of wisdom never to rely on your memory alone, scarcely even in acts of pure memory, but to bring the past for judgment into the thousand-eyed present and live ever in a new day. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so one thing that prevents us from trusting ourselves, from depending on ourselves, for relying on ourselves, is our consistency. And consistency, Emerson says, is something that we need to guard against. Let's suppose we did something in the past, and what we're doing now is different from what we did in the past. People will bring up those past actions and say, you know, at such and such a time you behaved in such and such a way, so why are you behaving differently now? So consistency is something else, Emerson says, that we need to guard against. And this very interesting question that he puts to his readers is, why should you keep your head over your shoulder? When do you keep your head over your shoulder? When you are looking back. So when you do this, you put your head over your shoulder, and that means looking back, looking into the past, going into your memories. And looking at the past, he says, is like dragging a dead body, because the past is dead. It's the present that is living. And the example that he gives is, he says that when you look at the past and you compare your present action with your past actions, then what you are doing is you are dragging a dead body. What is past is over and done with. You have to live in the present, so discard the past and live for the present. He says, supposing you contradict yourself, supposing you say something that is the opposite of what you said, let's say, last month. So what? What's the big deal? Why must you rely on memory alone? He says, this is something that is not dependable. Because what you're doing is you're judging the present with the rules that were made in the past. But the past is blind, the past is dead, the present, he says, is thousand-eyed. The present is alive, the present is living, the past is dead and gone, so forget about it. In your metaphysics, and then he comes on to another field, he says, in your metaphysics, you have denied personality to the deity. Metaphysics, those people who study metaphysics, they do not believe in a supreme being, in an almighty force. Yet when the devout motions of the soul come, yield to them heart and life, though they should clothe God with shape and color. Leave your theory as Joseph his coat in the hand of the harlot and flee. So he says the study of metaphysics does not give personality to the deity, to God, to the almighty being, to the divine being, to the supreme being. Yet he says there are times when they succumb and they do give form and shape to the deity. But he says, leave your theories as Joseph left his coat in the hands of the harlot and escaped. And this is, of course, a reference to the biblical story, which is also told in the Quran, on how Joseph, or Hazrat Yusuf, was seduced by a woman, and later she charged that he had assaulted her. So the judgment that was made was on the basis of the condition of his coat. And it was said that if his coat, or as the story is told to us, if his kurta was torn from the front, then Joseph was to be blamed. If the kurta or the coat was torn at the back, then the woman was to be blamed. So when it was presented, it was found out that the kurta or the coat had been torn at the back, which meant that the woman had tried to hold him, to drag him, and not the other way around. So that was just a digression. Coming back to Emerson's text, he says, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. So small minds go for a matching of the past with the present. With consistency, a great soul has simply nothing to do. So great people do not need to think about what they've said or done in the past. They need to concentrate on the present. And he compares looking back at the past and comparing the past with the present to giving importance to the shadow on the wall. So he says you don't need to concern yourself with the shadow on the wall. The shadow on the wall has no life. It's the person whose shadow is falling on the wall. It's the person who's living in the present is important. Speak what you think now in hard words, and tomorrow speak what tomorrow thinks in hard words again. Though it contradict everything you said today, also you shall be sure to be misunderstood. Is it so bad then to be misunderstood? You know, we sometimes think, oh, I don't want to be misunderstood, so let me make this clarification. Oh, I have to explain this to so-and-so. I don't want any misunderstanding between the two of us. He says, why is it so bad to be misunderstood? Pythagoras was misunderstood, so was Socrates, so was Jesus, Martin Luther, Copernicus, Galileo, Isaac Newton. All of these people were misunderstood. So did they suffer in the long run? No. So every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh has been misunderstood. To be great is to be misunderstood. Okay? So that doesn't mean that you people go out and create misunderstandings and say, well, this is what Madam Shahina said is greatness. This is what Emerson says is greatness. So there has to be a little misunderstanding. No man can violate his nature. All the sallies of his will are rounded in by the law of his being, as the inequalities of the Andes and the Himalaya are insignificant in the curve of the sphere. Look at the examples that Emerson is bringing in. Nor does it matter how you gauge and try him. A character is like an acrostic or Alexandrian stanza. Read it forward, backward, or across, it still spells the same thing. Beautiful examples Emerson brings in. He says that the Andes, which is a mountain range, and the Himalayas, well, you all know about the Himalayas, are mountain ranges. They're not plains, they're mountain ranges. But when you see the world as it is, when you look at the earth, then the earth has a spherical shape. The earth is not crooked. The Andes and the Himalayas are, so are other mountain ranges. There are plateaus, there are rivers, there are oceans, there are continents, huge land masses. Yet when you look at the earth from a distance, you see it as a sphere. You don't see any, let's say, any area which you think does not harmonize with another area. Everything is a sphere. So he says, if that can happen, what's the big deal? Why must what you say today harmonize with what you said yesterday? So what if you said something different? It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. A character is like an Alexandrian stanza. It's like an acrostic. You know, you can spell the word backwards, forwards, you can spell it diagonally, it will still be the same. So there's no big deal to saying something today that you did not say yesterday. In this pleasing, contrite wood life, which God allows me, let me record day by day my honest thought without prospect or retrospect, and I cannot doubt it will be found symmetrical, though I mean it not and see it not. My book should smell of pines and resound with the hum of insects. The swallow over my window should interweave that thread or straw he carries in his bell into my web also. We pass for what we are. So, Emerson sets out to record his days, his thoughts, his ideas, and he says that my book should not only be full of ideas, my book must include something of nature. As he says, it must smell of pines, it must be beautiful, and it should resound with the hum of insects. There must be life in my words, life in what I have written. Character teaches us about our wills. Men imagine that they communicate their virtue or vice only by overt actions and do not see that virtue or vice emit a breath every moment. So do not think that your virtues or your vices are communicated only by your actions. That is not the case. That's not the case at all. There will be an agreement in whatever variety of actions, so they be each honest and natural in their hour. For of one will the actions will be harmonious, however unlike they seem. So there will always be an agreement in actions. if you are honest, if you exercise candor, if you hide, if you try to tell lies, then you will not be able to produce harmony. These varieties are lost sight of at a little distance, at a little height of thought. One tendency unites them all. The voyage of the best ship is a zigzag line of 100 tacks. See the line from a sufficient distance and it straightens itself to the average tendency. Your genuine action will explain itself and will explain your other genuine actions. Your conformity explains nothing. Okay, so then he brings in different examples. You know, he's brought in so many different examples today. And this one is concerned with a voyage that a ship takes. Now, you know that a ship cannot possibly travel in a straight line. What Emerson is trying to point out here is that it appears as a straight line only because it is seen from a great distance. Let me give you another example. We look at the moon at night and the moon glows. The moon has a light that we think it sheds over our world. But those of you who have studied a little science will also know that the surface of the moon is like the surface of a desert in Balochistan, for example. It's dry, it's uneven, there are mountains, and then there are craters, there are ditches, there's all kinds of different terrains on the surface of the moon. But what does it look like to us who see it from thousands of miles away? A beautiful globe. Well, you know that astronauts, when they go into space, see the Earth in the same way. It just depends on the distance from which you view it. You see something close up, you are able to see defects, and you are able to see things from very close up. You're able to see shortcomings, you're able to see weak points. But if you look at something from a distance, everything appears beautiful. You draw a zigzag line on paper, you take that paper far away, you look at it, and that zigzag will appear as a straight line. So this is what Emerson is trying to tell us. We try to examine things from very close up, but if we stand at a distance, everything will appear perfect to us. Your genuine action will explain itself and will explain your other genuine actions. Your conformity explains nothing. If you do something just because the public wants it, that is not important at all. It explains nothing. But the genuine action that you undertake, that in itself is sufficient. You do not need to be defensive about it. You do not need to explain it. Act singly, and what you have already done singly will justify you now. Greatness appeals to the future. If I can be firm enough today to do right and to scorn eyes, I must have done so much right before as to defend me now. But be it how it will, do right now. So what he's saying is, concentrate on the present. Focus on the present. Always scorn appearances, and you always may. Now this is beautiful. I love this line. Always scorn appearances, and you always may. If you go for appearances, you get caught in a web from which you cannot escape. But if you don't pay attention to appearances, you will be judged at your merit. The force of character is cumulative. All the foregone days of virtue work their health into this moment, the present moment. Forget about the past. The past has nothing to do with the present. The past is dead and gone, it is buried. What is important is the here and the now, the present. The present is the moment that you have to live in. The present is the moment that you need to worry about, not the past. As he says, do not put your head over your shoulder. Don't look back into your past. What makes the majesty of the heroes of the Senate and the field, which so fills the imagination? So, question: the consciousness of a train of great days and victories behind. They shed a united light on the advancing actor. He is attended as by a visible escort of angels. That is it which throws thunder into Chatham's voice, and dignity into Washington's port, and America into Adams's eye. Okay. Now, what he is focusing on here is what makes great people great. And he takes three people. He takes Chatham, takes Washington, and he takes Adams. And the aspect of their personality that most impresses us, that is the voice of Chatham, the impressive appearance of Washington, and everything that America stands for in Adams's eye. So he says that what makes these great people great is a consciousness of a train of great days and victories behind. They have had successes, and those past successes ensure that they are mentioned with due regard and respect in the present day and age. It's like there's a host of angels guarding these people. But these angels are actually great deeds that they have performed. It's their deeds that make them into important persons, persons whose life and works affect the present. Honor is venerable to us because it is no ephemeris. It's not something that is temporary. It lasts. It is always ancient virtue. We worship it today because it is not of today. We love it and pay it homage because it is not a trap for our love and homage, but is self-dependent, self-derived, and therefore of an immaculate pedigree, even if shown in a young person. So it's honor that we have to strive for. And honor is not dependent on public opinion. We worship honor because honor is not something that is transitory. Honor is something that lasts. Honor is something that is permanent. We love honor, we pay homage to honor because it doesn't want our love and homage. It is separate, it is apart from love and homage. Honor is self-dependent, honor is self-derived. And because it is self-dependent and because it is self-derived, it does not need any outside force. It does not need to depend on an outside agency. It is self-dependent, self-derived. No outside source, no outside agency can affect it. I hope in these days we have heard the last of conformity and consistency. So Emerson wants to do away with conformity and consistency. Let the words be gazetted and ridiculous henceforward. So speak what you want to, say what you want to. There's going to be no ban, no imposition of a ban on your speech. Instead of the gong for dinner, let us hear a whistle from the Spartan fife. Let us never bow and apologize more. A great man is coming to eat at my house. I do not wish to please him. I wish that he should wish to please me. Okay. Now, he says we have to do away with conformity. Let us be ridiculous from this point forward. Let us change the world. Let us not go by what we have been doing in the past years. Let's create a brave new world, as he calls it. He says, why must we keep on doing what has been done for countless generations? And look at the examples that he brings in. In American households, in English households, a kind of bell or a gong was sounded for dinner, where you had a lot of people gathered. One of the servants would strike the gong, and that would mean that dinner had been served. Instead of going and calling each individual, they would just sound the gong, and everybody would get up and walk into the dining area. So he says, why can't we change things? Why can't we have a fife playing? Why just have a gong? A gong is something that grates on the ears. It just scares you. Whereas if you have a whistle or a fife playing, you know, that would be such an attractive sound. You wouldn't need to be startled. You wouldn't be scared. It would just be a very pleasant, a musical sound, and not this huge blast that is going to be a gong. So why not have a Spartan fife? And then he brings in another idea, and he says, you know, I invite somebody to eat at my house, and yes, it's a wonderful occasion, but then why can I not change the rules a little? Why do I have to make him happy? Why can he not come to my house and make me happy? Why should I strive for him? Why should he not strive for me? So he's presenting a whole lot of different ideas here to show how you need to rely on yourself. And just to sort of recap what we've done today, Emerson, the portion of the essay on self-reliance that we've been discussing today, focuses on changing the world, on bringing about a change in the world. And the portion that we did today emphasized emphasized Emerson's viewpoint that we need to do away with conformity. And he starts off by giving different examples. He says that we always read the words of the great ones, and we are told to learn from our ancestors. But why is it that we have to keep our head over our shoulder? And by giving this example, Emerson is trying to focus on the significance that the past holds for us, and which he says we need to do without. We have to do away with the past. Why must we always be going down memory lane and trying to make the present out of our past experiences. What he's trying to focus on is the importance of the present, the significance of the present moment, as opposed to what has happened in the past, because he says in the past all that we have are memories, and why should we drag our memories around, because what happened in the past is dead and forgotten. What is living is the present, and we have to make sure that we make our present habitable, and that our present carries the focus of our attention. We have to remove our attention from the past and bring it to the present, and make sure that we make our present habitable, we make our present so wonderful that it will be cited by posterity. So he gives in different examples, and one of the examples that he brings in is that of how in traditional English households dinner was announced, and he says that it's a gong that is sounded, and that must be changed, because we cannot conform to the past all the time. We need to break away from the traditions of the past. We need to create something new, and we can do that by focusing on the present and by letting the dead past bury its dead. And then he brings in another example, and that is of a man who is coming to his house to have dinner with him, and he says that a great man is coming to my house. I don't want to please that man, I want him to please me. Generally, what happens is when we invite people to our houses, we try to please them, we try to make whatever they like to eat, we try to greet them in a way that gives them respect. But Emerson says that we need to change things, and we need to do away with conformity. What we have been doing up to this point is keeping to our traditions. Once we say something, we need to conform to it, because people will come up and say, well, you said this yesterday, and today what you are saying is something totally different. So Emerson's point of view is, why do we need to conform? Why can I not say something different today? And all this focus on being misunderstood, he says, so what if somebody is misunderstood? The world will not come to an end, and we need to make sure that whatever we are saying and doing today is what we want to do. We don't want to do what people at gunpoint will have us do. We must think for ourselves and not just automatically follow the herd. We need to think for ourselves, even if it is in something like, let's say, charities. He says, I don't want to give money because people say that I must give money to so and so. I want to give money to people whom I believe to be mine, with whom I have a connection. I don't want to give people money just because somebody is trying to force me to it. I don't like being told what to do. I want to decide for myself. I need to make my own decisions and not just go by what people tell me. So that's all that we're going to be doing today, and hopefully we'll do a little more Emerson before we go on to something else. Thank you for being such patient listeners. Allah Hafiz.